I'm Flip, and today I'm going to show you how to put together the mangrove push-pull step by step. Step one is we're going to clean out the inside of each section with either denatured alcohol or acetone. Step two is going to involve some sanding of both the ferrule part and the inside of each of the push-pull sections. The epoxy won't stick well unless these parts are very well sanded. So take an extra moment, make sure that you've got them well sanded. The surface will take on a white, powdery appearance when it's properly sanded. The ferrule is done. Now let's rough up the inside section. You can use sandpaper. I use a round file. It's just quicker and easier for me to rough up the inside of this with a round file. Or you can take the sandpaper and you can, I guess, roll it up. And just in an abundance of caution, so that I get a little further inside of the thing, I want to run this round file through there a few times just to make sure. It may not even be necessary, but it makes me sleep at night. All right. Right after finishing with the sanding process, we're going to use some more acetone or alcohol to clean all this little bit of fiber and powder that you sanded. You need to get that out of there because the epoxy will not stick to that. So the better you prepare these parts, the better this push-pull is going to perform. You can see all the little particles on there. That's what we want to be rid of. And we have to get them also off of the ferrule. Cannot take too much caution on these steps. Okay. Fingers should come out clean. Okay. Next, I'm going to prepare the point end of the push-pull and the fork end of the push-pull by drilling some small random holes which just give the glue a place to park and hold. These holes can just be drilled randomly, and do 6 or 8 of them randomly with a 3/8 or a 1/4 inch drill bit. Both the fork end and the point end have to be sanded in addition to drilling these holes, just the way we sanded the ferrules and the inside of each push-pull section. So, do same sandpaper. Let's rough these up real good. You can also use the round file. It's real good for this. It makes real rough marks on here that gives the epoxy some place to grab. the sections and the ferrule so that we can avoid some epoxy bleed over later. And it's very easy to do. Just take some masking tape and go right around the end of the ferrule, of the push-pull section. And then we're going to measure equal parts of the ferrule with a divider, and I like to just mark it with a Sharpie so that we know where we are. So we're going to put a piece of masking tape on this as well, so that when we put them together and the epoxy pushes out, we're not going to have a big cleanup method. So the idea being now when we join these, when we have epoxy in here and the epoxy squishes out, you're not going to have to worry about cleaning this up. This is a two-part epoxy West Systems, 1-to-1, so you use equal parts of these two products, and then the secret is mixing them really, really, really well so that you get a good even cure. This is a slow cure epoxy. I wouldn't use any of the fast cure epoxies. They really don't have the tensile strength that the slow cures have. All right, so here's interesting information for you to know. This part of the push-pull, this section, is wrapped in a spiral, and if you run your fingers past it one way, you'll feel that it's rough. You can hear it. It's rough. The other way, it's smooth. It's when your hands are wet or when they're sweaty and you're pushing against the smooth direction, your hands can slip. As long as you assemble these so that at either end you're pushing against the rough part, you'll find that it's a lot more friendly in terms of letting you push. So here's what I do. Now we're going to put the foot end into this part of the pole. So what I do is just wad up a piece of paper. I stick it in the end. And then I take that portion of the foot which is going to go into the pole and I push that paper in. So once I've pushed that piece of paper down to the bottom of where this push-pull fork is going to stick into the section, I'll take a little bit of this epoxy that I just mixed up, and I'm going to just put a little bit of it on this foot end right here. Doesn't take much, just a little. Making sure that I get some in those little holes that I just drilled. That's important. Then I'm going to take some epoxy and I'm going to put it right down inside of the push-pull. And the paper is stopping it from running down through the pull. Okay. Now we're just going to squeeze this in, and I'm going to screw it in so that I slowly go down into that big pool of epoxy that's down above the paper. And some is going to squirt out the end. You can see it coming out right here. That's okay. And that masking tape is catching it so that when I peel that masking tape off, all this mess will come off with it. Okay, so that's in there as far as it'll go. Now I can take this off right now. And I've gotten rid of all that mess. And I've got these spirals facing this way so that I can get good purchase on this pole when I push with the point end, which will be at the other end of the pole. So now we're going to put a ferrule that we prepared a moment ago into this end of the pole. Okay, so I'm going to wad up my paper once again. Now I'll take the ferrule, which I marked, and I'll push that paper down right to my mark. Then I'll take a little bit of epoxy and put it on the ferrule itself. All this preparation is worth it when you get on the first flat, start tailing after that first redfish or bonefish. Think back on all you did to get you to that point. Part of the journey. You don't have to cover every bit of this because we're going to put some in the end of the pole. Okay, now we're going into the end of the pole. And now I'm going to take the ferrule itself, put it right in here, and I'm going to screw it in slowly and gently, just like I did with the foot end when I put it in. And there'll be mess that runs off, but this masking tape that I put on there will catch all that mess. And we're right there. So I'm going to just catch some of that goop. Can save it. I'm going to take this masking tape off. And I'm going to leave this one on there until this gets a little bit harder. And then, because we're not going to glue this in until later into the other section, so I'll wait till this gets a little bit harder, then I'll take that off and make sure that this part stays where I put it originally. And you just keep going to all the other sections and ferrules exactly the way we did this. And then when you get to the other end of the pole, remembering to keep these spirals in a direction where you have purchase with your hands, then you're going to put the point end in the other end of the pole. Trying to make sure that the epoxy is going into those little holes that I drilled. Now I'm going to put a piece of paper in here to stop the epoxy from flowing in, just as I did on the other end. All right, and now we're going to put the epoxy in here. Now, this is not as tight a fit as the fork end was. So to make sure that it stays in place while the epoxy is curing, I'm going to take some masking tape, make sure that it's pushed down hard, and I'm just going to tape around here just to hold it in perfect position while it's drying. You pull that off later, and it should come right off. So now we have either end of the push pole completed. We've got the fork end, we've got the point end, and as soon as the ferrules in between are dry, we'll go ahead and assemble the entire pole. So overnight, this section has cured with the point end. The other section has cured with the foot end on it, right down there. So what I'm going to do is put a center section in here and complete about a 14 or a 15 foot push pole, which I'm going to use for my John boat, and that's all the length that I need. If I had a need for a greater one, we might have to put in another section, but this is going to work fine for me. So I'm going to just repeat everything that I did yesterday when we assembled these, and that would be, first, I'm going to put a little epoxy on this male ferrule. Okay, so I have a light coat of epoxy on that ferrule, and now I'm going to put some epoxy down inside the female section that's going to go over this. Remember that I stuffed paper in here to stop this epoxy from running down the tube. And that should be plenty. All right. And I'll slowly, there's going to be some slowly join them together, and notice that I'm just letting this epoxy run back into the cup. Okay, now this little residue that's around the seam, I'm going to take that off with the putty knife, put it back in the cup. Then I'm going to take this rag that has a little acetone on it, and I'm just going to clean that up just a little bit. I'm not going to worry about getting it too clean at this point, because I'll dress it up at the very end after it's cured. But now, to make sure that it stays together the way I want it, I'm going to tape it. All right, so before I tape the seam, notice there's a little gap. So I'm pulling that gap out. And now I'll tape it. This keeps the epoxy from oozing back out, keeps the pieces together, and this will just peel right off after the cure, which will be overnight. Got ourselves a push pole.